It's your boy Bugsy. Like, subscribe the video. Unitized Body Structure Repair Guidelines. Ultra high strength steel cannot be repaired. It must be replaced when damaged. So when you got something that's a high strength steel, do not try to repair it. Do not try to unbend it, nothing like that. Just replace it. And the next one. A high propriocity weld is usually caused by no shielding gas, which means you ain't got no gas coming out your weld. So check your gas. Maybe you need higher dosage or whatever. Now, the recommended shielding gas is 70% argon and 25% CO2. So when you're setting your welder and your gas, you want 75% argon and 25% CO2. Now, a flux-coated wire is not recommended for structural welds. 0.023, 0.030, or 0.035 wire is acceptable. So when you're doing structural welds, you need the right type of wire to weld it. Next question. The last number of welding wire rating designates the chemical makeup. So that means the last number of the welding wire is going to tell you what the wire is made of. Now, the higher the number, such as number 6 or higher, the better the wire. So the last number, if it's a high number, it's a better type of wire. Now, MIG, which is MIG welding, is the only recommended welding method for structural repair. So when you're doing structural repair, only use a MIG welder. A butt weld is not acceptable unless it is reinforced with an insert. So if you're going to butt weld, you got to put another piece in the inside and weld that also and properly primer it. Which leads to my next one. A butt weld with an insert must be both plug welded, both sides of the joint, and continuous weld at the joint itself. So it must be both butt welded at the joint and the continuous weld itself. When MIG welding, the glass should be covered with a blanket. The battery should be disconnected and the computer removed if welding is within 12 to 18 inches from it. So if you're MIG welding, put a blanket over the glass and unconnect the battery if you is 12 to 18 inches away from these items. When sectioning a foam filled post, the foam must be replaced with a 2-part urethane foam after welding is completed. So when you're sectioning a foam filled post, you got to replace it with a 2-part urethane foam after the weld is completed. A 110 volt MIG welder is considered acceptable if it will put out 90 to 100 amps. So if you're putting out 90 to 100 amps, a 110 volt MIG welder is considered acceptable. Weld through primers should be rich in zinc. So if you're using the primer after you weld, get a rich in zinc primer. High zinc primer. When welding zinc coated or galvanized steel, the welder setting would be slightly higher than an uncoated steel of the same thickness to improve weld penetration. So that means if you welding with a zinc coated or a galvanized steel, the welder setting should be a little bit higher to improve the thickness of the weld penetration. Tensile strength is the amount of pressure or force necessary to tear, fracture, or puncture the steel. So tensile strength means it's the amount of pressure that can tear or fracture or puncture your steel. High strength steel, known as HSS, cannot be identified by color or other visual means. It can only be identified by checking the appropriate body service manual. So you got to check the manual on your car to identify what parts is high strength steel. You can't just say, oh, this color is discolorated, so this is high strength steel. No, you got to check your manufacturer's book. A temperature crayon may be used to tell how hot the metal is being heated. When the temperature designate on the crayon is reached, it melts. So a temperature crayon is like when you're trying to reach a certain temperature, they got a crayon that is going to melt at that certain temperature, so you know when it's time to heat your metal. A 3-minute limit on heating HSS or HSLA steel means a total combined. So it's a 3-minute heating limit, and if it don't melt by then, yeah. Time of 3 minutes, is that allowable? Oh, it's the melting time of 3 minutes is all that's allowable. So if it don't melt within 3 minutes, you got to try something different. Restoring corrosion protection is considered a part of the structural repair on all jobs. So on every job you do, restoring the corrosion protection is considered a part of structural repair. So that means you got to primer everything you weld. When restoring corrosion protection, do not touch the metal with your bare hands after it is cleaned. Allow sprayed on corrosion protection to flash after each coat and remove all rust from the metal first. So when you're restoring corrosion protection, don't touch the metal with your hands and make sure everything is clean and free of rust. A 2-part epoxy primer is considered the best for corrosion protection. Avoid lacquer products. So a 2-part epoxy primer is considered the best corrosion protection. So if you want the best corrosion protection, use a 2-part epoxy primer. Corrosion protection must be applied to enclosed interior surface, exposed joints, exposed interior surface, and exposed exterior surface. So a primer must be applied to anything that's bare, and from the inside it should be covered the whole metal piece you repaired. Sectioning a structure member is considered acceptable repair technique when properly done. So you can section a structure member if it's properly done. So long as your butt welds right, everything welded right, and your primer is corrosion protected, you good. Sectioning may be done on the frame rail, but do not section in crash zone, near suspension or mechanically mounted areas, near large holes, or any area where corrosion protection cannot be applied well. So you can section on the frame well, rail, but not where if you can't primer it and corrosion protection it, if you can't get inside of there, it's not recommended. Especially by the front zone, the crash zones, and by like your front suspension area, you really don't want to do that. Now, sectioning can produce a strong and serviceable repair when properly done. So if you do section right, it's acceptable and it can hold just as good as the factory. Crush zones are always in the front or rear section of the automobile. The center section does not have crash zones. So your crush zones is in the front and back. It's like shocks. They absorb the impact, and they got different crush zones, which is a small impact and big impact. It kind of is there to save the car, actually, the vehicle. Crush zones are areas of structural components that is weakened by the introduction of wrinkles, pleats, convolutions, changes in spot weld spacing, holes, reducing the number of layers of steel, or using mild steel next to high strength steel. I'm going to run that back. Crush zones are areas of the structural component that is weakened by an introduction of wrinkles, pleats, convolutions, and changes in spot weld spacing, holes. Reducing the number of layers of steel is using mild steel next to high strength steel. Next thing is, crush zones are designed to reduce the damage to more expensive, hard to repair areas, protect the passenger compartments, and absorb the collision impact. So crush zones are put in cars to save the actual body of the car. So it'll take the hit from a collision and it'll buckle before it damage the important parts of the car. Space frame design vehicles have the interior panels attached with structural adhesive and special fasteners. One-time fasteners mean that they may not be reused, attached, and replace panels. New fasteners must be used when a panel is replaced. So you got these, you know how these look clips, panel clips. Some clips are not replaceable when you take them off. They're one-time use only. So when you take them off, you got to replace them with a new clip. Don't try to save them and reuse them. The datum plane of a vehicle established by 3 or more references points. In the center section of the vehicle, datum plane measurements always refer to height measurements at the specific points. Datum measurements are shown on the side view of the frame diagrams. So your datum plane on your vehicle established by 3 or more reference points. The center section of the vehicle, datum measurements always refer to the height measurement at specific points. Datum measurements are shown on the side view of the frame's diagram. When using self-centered gauges, the center section is always the base for all gauging. So when using a self-centered gauge, the center section is always the base for all gauging. So place it in the center before you gauge anything. Center line is shown on the frame dimension chart in the top view. Center lines are sometimes stamped on the body parts. So the center line is, if you want the information for the center line, is on the frame dimension chart, and center line sometimes stamped on the body parts. Symmetrical dimensions are those that are equal on both sides of the center line. So symmetrical dimensions are even on both sides of the center line. So if it's even over here and even over there, it's symmetrical. Now, asymmetrical dimensions are not equal from side to side. So when you pull the frame and it's off on this side, when it's not measuring on this side, not measuring on that side, it's not right. It's asymmetrical. Asymmetrical. Point-to-point measurements may be measured with a steel tape if there is no obstruction between the reference points being measured. So you can do a point-to-point measurement if there's nothing obstruction, nothing in the way of the tape. If it can measure from side to side with no interference, you can do it. Loaded dimensions means all the interior trim, bumpers, mechanic, and fluids must be on the vehicle, and the weight of the complete vehicle is on the suspension. So a loaded suspension means all the interior trim, bumper, mechanics, fluids must be on the vehicle, and the weight of the complete vehicle in suspension. So that's when you just weighing your car up, seeing the amount of pressure it could take. When anchoring a vehicle for structure repairs, the holding force must be eventually distributed to prevent damage. So when you anchor a vehicle for structure repairs, when you're putting it on that frame machine for structural repairs, the holding force must be evenly distributed. So if you're going to anchor it over here, you got to anchor it over there. So it's got to be, really a 4-point anchoring system to hold your vehicle. Vehicles with no pinch welds required special attachment to properly anchor the vehicle. Do not attach anchor holes to suspension parts. So vehicles that don't got those little pinch welds at the bottom, you gotta find the special attachments to anchor them. You can't don't put it like around the struts or anything like that, the rotors or nothing like that. Never use any sway bars. Don't use nothing like that. You got to mount it to the body frame. Multiple pulls are the best method to prevent tearing and damage during the pulls. So if you gotta switch positions, switch the anchor where you're pulling, do that. Don't just try to pull it all at one time. So pulling multiple different pulls is better to prevent the tearing than just trying to pull it all out with one pull. If a section of the unibody structure is overpulled, it should usually be replaced. So case in being, you pull and you overpull, you cannot beat back in place. So typically you want to replace it if you overpull. So be careful and check your measurements every other pull. The usual tolerance for most unibody structure is plus or minus 3M. 1/8 inch. However, many latest designs have tolerance of plus or 1 millimeter, which is 32 of an inch. So what I'm saying is, usually the tolerance for most body structures, like when you're pulling something, usually you can be off by 1/8 of an inch. In some vehicles, you can be off by 1/32 of an inch. Direct damage is that damage which is the result of contact with the object, car, tree, bridge, etc., that the vehicle struck. Direct damage will confine to the area of actual impact. So direct damage is the damage that's the result of the contact, the direct contact from the whatever the vehicle impacted. Indirect or secondary damage is caused by the transmission of the collision impact energy to the remainder of the vehicle. It is usually identified by buckles some distance from the direct impact area. Also split seams, sealers, pulled spots, welds, pour panel alignments, or cracked glass. So indirect secondary damage is caused by the transmission of the collision impact to the remainder of the vehicle. You usually can tell by like a buckle or a tear or something in the frame or the body parts, and you can tell that that's the secondary damage. To remove structural part, the spot weld should be removed with a spot weld cutter followed by an air chisel to separate the parts. Do not use acetylene torch. So when you're removing the welds to repair structural parts, remove them properly. Take out the weld and then chisel the rest of the panel off. The adhesive mounted glass is considered a structural part of the vehicle on many late model cars and trucks. Butane tape alone does not restore the structural integrity of the glass. So it's saying adhesive mounted glass is considered structural repair. So just restoring the structural integrity of the glass, you can't just use the butyl tape alone. You got to really take this serious, like you repairing a frame. To replace urethane set glass is acceptable procedure to use rectangular butyl tape on the inner edge of the pinch weld. If filled the remaining area with a quick set urethane sealer, this will restore structural strength. So the proper way to repair a windshield is replace urethane set glass in this acceptable procedure to use rectangular butyl tape on the inner edge of the pinch weld and fill the remaining areas with quick set urethane sealer. Now, structural parts that are kinked sharply or torn should be replaced. Those which are bent may be straightened. So if it's a structural part that got crinkles and little tear in them, you need to replace them. If they just bent, you can straighten them. When applying corrosion protection, do not allow rust-proof materials to contact the electrical part, latches, etc., and do not plug factory drain holes. So when you're applying corrosion protection, don't let the rust-proof materials contact the electrical parts. Like when you got car latches and stuff like that, mechanical windows rolling up, you don't want to let your primer get in contact with that stuff. Less factory corrosion protection may be disturbed if structural parts are sectioned than if entire assembly are replaced. So less factory corrosion protection may be disturbed if the structural parts are sectioned and if they assembled are replaced. So if you just take the whole part off and replace it, it's better than trying to fix something. So that concludes our Michigan State Board test. I hope y'all like it. I hope y'all listen, and I hope y'all pass the test. Give me a big shout out. Like, subscribe the video. Don't forget to say that. You gotta like, subscribe the video, share the video, pass the link on. It's your boy Bugsy. Holla back. Jack of all trades, Prep Academy, Destroy and Rebuild Construction, got it out the mud, landscaping, urban business development. Stay tuned. We in the house, baby.